And welcome back to another video. In this video, we'll be discussing about how to add logic to your Python code, right? So if you have, let's say, a problem statement, how do you arrive with the logic before you start coding? So that is a very important thing that any programmer needs to learn before he gets into full on coding. Right. So to get started, first we'll take an example, right? For example, if we need to do a task so let's take this example of I want to prepare, let's say, a cup of coffee, right? So I immediately can't start preparing my cup of coffee. So first I need to understand what are the steps that are involved in it before I get into it, right? So the first thing that we will be doing, let me convert this into quotes, right? So in preparing a cup of coffee, so the first thing I will be doing is I need milk, right? So I need milk and I need, let's say, coffee seeds or coffee powder, and have to mix them together, right? And I also need sugar. Okay. So what do I do? If it is instant coffee, I will take milk, and the next thing I'll be doing is I'll be adding my coffee powder. So let's say add coffee powder, and the finally I'll be adding my sugar. So add sugar, and finally I'll be mixing it all together. Mix it all together, and finally I have my coffee. So enjoy the cup of coffee, right? So in this example, right, so what we've done, we know our final goal, that is preparing a cup of coffee, and we first had a look at what all ingredients that we needed, that is milk, coffee powder, and sugar. And next thing, we started noting down all the activities that we're supposed to be doing in the form of points, right? So this is actually a concept implemented in coding, and it is called pseudocode, right? Pseudocode. So pseudocode is nothing but the flow of what you're supposed to be doing in a much more understandable English language rather than exact code itself. Before you get into the exact code, you write what all steps that you're going to be doing in a chronological order in English, right? So that will be our pseudocode. So let's take a coding example now, right? So for example, if I need to compare, okay, so the problem statement here is I need to compare three numbers, right? So I need to compare three numbers and find out the biggest one. Find out the biggest number. Okay. So how do we start here? So first we need to make sure we have all the ingredients, right? So the ingredients would be number A, B, and C, right? So if we are comparing three numbers, first we need those three numbers. The next thing would be to perform the comparison, right? So how do you compare in terms of like when you have three numbers? First, you need to see you need to let's say we have A and B, right? So we compare A and B, right? So if A and B we compare, and then we have a result, let's say A is bigger. So does that mean that A is the biggest out of all three? No, we still have C, right? So if A is bigger, what do we need to do? We need to compare C and A. If C is greater than A, then C it is, right? But this is not all the possibilities that can happen in this particular problem, right? So if A is greater than B, then A is greater, and then C is greater than A, then C is greater. But what if B is greater than A, right? So the next thing we'll be doing is comparing C and B, right? So after that, if B is greater, then B is the greatest, right? So now we have a flow of what we need to do. So first we have to compare two numbers, right? So we compare two numbers and then take the greatest among them, and we will compare with the third number, right? And whichever is greater, which one is greater would be the greatest of all three, right? So this is the flow that we are going to follow. We take three numbers, we compare any two numbers, take the greatest among them, compare with the third number, which one is greater would be the greatest of all three, right? So now we have a flow in which we can work with because now we can simply start writing code. Let's say we have three numbers. A is equal to 10, B is equal to, let's say, 5, and C is equal to, let's say, 12, right? So I have my three numbers. So what will be the next thing? I have to compare two numbers, right? So how do I compare two numbers? So A greater than B. So this is my comparison statement, right? But I need to take the greatest among them and I have to compare with the third number, right? So I have to give a condition here. Let's say if A is greater than B, right? That means what? We've compared two numbers and A is greater. If A is greater than B, then we need to compare, right? We need to compare A and C, right? So if C is greater than A, that means what? We need to print C is greatest, right? So now we do not have the entire answer, we just have a part of the answer. So what we're doing is, if A is greater than B and C is greater than A, then C will be the greatest, right? So here, if A is greater than B, what if A is not greater than B, right? So else, if A is greater than B, then this is the path we'll follow. Else, if B is greater than A, we need to compare B and C, right? So if B is greater than C, right, print B is greatest, right? So what do we have now? We have A is greater than B, B is greater than C. So two different possibilities, right? So if A is greater than B, if it is true, we need to compare A and C. Now if C is greater, we have the print, but what if A is greater, right? So here we put an else and we print A is the greatest. Okay, so now if B is greater, and here what if C is greater? If C is greater, we will have an else statement here, else print C is greatest. Okay, so now we have a logic in place. So now since we have the logic in place, we will analyze the flow of the logic, right? So according to this pseudocode that we have written, so first, are we comparing two numbers? Yes, we're comparing A and B, right? And we're comparing, so yeah, so once we compare two numbers, we take the greatest among them, right? So if A is greater than B, A is the greater, right? So we take the greatest and we compare it with the third number. If the third number is greater, then the third number is the greatest. If suppose the third number is not greater, then A would be the greatest. Then again, if we compare the first two numbers, what if it's the other way around? What if B is greater? And then we again compare it with the third number, and if that is greater, then that is the greatest, or else then C will be the greatest, right? So this is our program logic. So with that logic, we need to get the answer as C is equal to 12, that is the greatest number. So we need to get the answer as C is greatest, right? So we'll run the code. I'll save it, we'll run the code. Yes, we are getting the answer, C is greatest, right? So what we have done until now is we have taken problem statement, that is compare three numbers and find out the biggest number, and we have written a logic for it. So this pseudo code is basically the way of thinking of how we need to code to get the right answer, right? So we have built a logic for this problem statement, and this is our code, right? So we have, so now we understood the flow of the code as well. So one more important and noteworthy thing in this particular code is that we have used the if and else statement. So in the previous videos, we have explained what if and else statements are. So if and else statements in this programming logic is generally called as a control statement, for because if and else statements controls the flow of the program, right? So what if a is greater than b, then this would be the flow of the program, right? So if a is greater than b, it goes inside, and this is the flow of the program, right? If a is not greater than b, then this would be the flow of the program. This would be the flow of the program, right? So it controls the flow and the outputs of the program. So these statements are called control statements, right? So I hope you understood what are what is adding logic to a Python code. This is a very simple example. In the further videos, we'll be looking at complex examples, breaking down into smaller ones and understanding the logic behind them. For now, I hope you understood how to build a logic for a very simple problem. And thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.